monuments, there's no argument, right? If you don't find the original monuments and the lines of possession, you know, the measurements are wrong, but it looks more like what the original deed calls for. Yeah.
How can it be like that?
How can it be? No monuments.
Yeah, well, how can it look like what the original deed looks like, but measurements don't match?
You dropped a chain. What's more common out here?
Rattlesnake came after you.
That too, well, early enough, and it was Comanches and Apaches. But in fact, if it was done in the 1870s, there's a good chance that you've got either quite a bit of excess or deficiency. Generally, this is not so much talking about the railroad surveys, because you've got your block corners to come on. This is more like the original patent surveys that can be any shape in the world. And that's something you're going to, like when you take the Texas law course in the fall, they'll cover a whole lot more of that. Yeah, most of Texas is those rectangular surveys. That's simply because so much of Texas was just flat empty when it was surveyed. The more populated areas, it's really, really confusing. We'll bring up a map of Williamson County, which is pretty confusing. It's nothing like Ector County or Glasgow. There you have nothing but these rectangles. In Williamson, it goes all the way back to the Spanish, and the Mexican administration. So you got some big ones, and then a lot of little small ones, and then some that were disallowed, and all that. So there's a lot of history to be learned from there. But basically, 18 or 17 is more about best available evidence. And if you find, if you find the original monuments and the measurement is off, then the description is defective. That doesn't give you the right to go 2 miles when it says 1 mile. Wishful thinking. And oh boy, if it's in a box, you need to know it. Should never give clients legal advice as to unwritten rights. You can get yourself. If someone takes your word on something like that and loses,
they're gonna come after you.
Yeah. And the real estate lawyer is not necessarily your friend, because he can, he's representing the client's best interests. You are representing not just the client's best interests, but now, if you become an RPLS, you have to take an oath to represent the interests of the state, the interests of the public now. And now when you re-up, you have to, put your stamp on the, they don't make you, stand up and take the oath in person. But you actually have to agree to represent the interests of the public. So as a surveyor, you are not just representing the client, you're representing the interests of the public. Unlike an attorney. Oh, how do you report issues with unwritten rights to a client?
You don't, do you?
Well, if you think someone has unwritten rights against your client, what do? Like what we talk about, encroachment. You think the neighbor's fence is not where the neighbor's fence ought to be, or that the roof of that garage is hanging over where I think the property line is. What do you do?
You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that.
if you're surveying for the client and someone else's
Yeah, let's
property
say you
is
kind of went wrong on your survey and they hire somebody else, other person.
what do you basically, if you determine there is evidence that you have, say, encroachment,
Or you just show it on the survey and let
you
them
show it on the survey, and or you write a written report to the client. You make sure that you have it in writing, that you indicate. Now, you don't say that there is encroachment going on. You say, line of possession does not agree with the deed. So basically, you have to tell the client something is going on, but you must not practice law.
So do you tell him right then and there, or do you wait till you finish up and show him on the survey?
Basically, it's you must when you hand the work to the client,
Okay.
you must say there is something going on here. You can't just ignore it, and prudently you don't run off and call the client very first thing.
See, because 90% of the time you're not out there saying you as an RPLS.
Right.
You got your field crew out there, so
Basically, the field crew doesn't talk to the client. Field crew should listen to the client, but they shouldn't do a whole lot of talking to the client.
I tell them a lot of bullshit.
Well, I love to tell neighbors stories.
When you come talking to me, you're going to get a whole load.
Well,
of
like put on the on the left, future site reptile farm. Anything you can do to pull somebody's chain, as long as they think it's funny. But no, if you've got a line, here is, let me borrow that, this tract here and this tract here, and your deed calls for that, and their property does that, and that's fenced, you tell the client, written report or plat. You note it on the plat. You don't go half-cocked, but you make real sure your measurements are there, and send the crew out again if you need to, because these can be really, really expensive things when they go wrong. But if the lines of possession don't agree with the deed lines, you have an obligation to tell that to the client. You don't have an obligation to tell it to the next door neighbor. You do have an obligation to tell the client if you think their fence lines go further than the deed calls for, because that's just prudent to let the client know that there might be an issue.
What if it's about 1.5 inches?
Yeah. We had one like that.
Really?
Yeah, Andy's. The 2 inches.
I keep hearing about that.
2 inches.
I mean, 2 inches is.
Now he got
You
fined.
can't.
Well, it's
I know he
relative,
did.
So
Yeah.
if it's, as far as somebody's fence, maybe that could make
It depends on how the fence was measured.
Okay.
In
But
the
if
field,
it's-
in the field, did they measure face of the fence, back of the fence, center of the
I
post?
have no idea. I mean,
And how who built the fence?
that
Who?
whole area was messed up just
Yeah.
a part though. There's a bust out there in that subdivision.
Yeah.
So, but he got the ride for it.
Who did
That's
this?
what I heard, and everything I heard about that was awful.
I mean, she hired, I don't know, she tried to sue West, and when she went after Andy, and I don't know who else she tried to. This lady was off the wall over the 2 inches.
Well, I've heard about 1/4 of an inch being an issue to a client, and fortunately, both the surveyor and the fence builder told the old lady that she was being unreasonable, and this is the fence builder working for the old woman, because he had built it in too far. Like it was taking.
Her fence was
Her
encroaching on
fence
her own.
was actually
Is that her property?
being built on her neighbor's land, and was the face of the fence came in 1/4 of an inch onto her property,
And she was meant.
and it's like, Wait a second. So,
Depends how people are in their head too. That lady got arrested and stuff a couple of times there on Poside.
that I hadn't heard. Is that the same one?
Same lady.
Ooh.
For what?
She went crazy over that. And I thought she put up a metal sheets of metal, aluminum sheets, about 8, 9 foot high. So the
As a fence?
As a fence, and the
Okay.
neighbors got mad, so they had to tear it down. And I mean, it was. I don't even know what happened at the end. I just know Andy got fined for it.
Well, he bit the bullet on that.
Yeah, he did.
And fortunately, won't be dealing with that anymore there. Anyway, we are about out of time. We will have a test a week from tonight, chapters 11, 12, and 13. If I told you it was important, it's important. If it's in a box, it's important. If it's in bold-faced type, it's important. If it's in italic type, it's
That's
important.
everything there.
No, there's a but you know, if you just read it, you'll have it. When you get into things like acquiescence and adverse possession, I'm not trying to make you lawyers. I'm just trying to, to work the gray matter so that when you're actually dealing with a client, you don't go talking about something as if it is adverse possession when it's acquiescence. Don't practice law. Just, know what to shoot and shoot it, and put it on the, on your plats and in your reports. And don't overreact. And don't, you've got to know this stuff. It would have been way easier on you taking the Texas law course if you had all this beforehand. That was, well, I thought I was not long for this world. I figured let's go out with a bang. Yeah, well, so am I, yeah. Hit the red button if you would.